Welcome to New Thinking for a New World, a Tallberg Foundation podcast. I am Alan Stoga, your host. Each week, I bring you conversations with people who think differently about the great issues that are shaping our world. Geopolitics, disruptive tech, mass migration, the changing climate, culture wars, all of it is grist for our mill. I hope you enjoy listening. I also hope you will let me know what you think and that you join the conversation at tallbergfoundation.org. And now for today's episode of New Thinking for a New World. Gender inequality is a global fact of life. Around the world, on average, women earn a quarter less than men for the same jobs. Women do at least twice as much unpaid care work as men, and when combined with paid work, they work longer than men, 4 years longer over comparable lifetimes. The result? More women than men live in poverty. Indeed, more than 10% of women globally, some 400 million people, are trapped in a cycle of extreme poverty, where extreme poverty is defined as something on the order of living on $2 per day. None of this is new news, nor is it particularly a function of our times. If anything, there is more awareness and more effort to identify and close gaps today than ever before. Indeed, one of the Sustainable Development Goals agreed to with much fanfare in 2015 by the members of the United Nations was to achieve gender equality by 2030. However, fast forward to 2024, by the UN's own measurements, member states are obviously far off track from that goal. Like so much else, it also seems obvious that new approaches are necessary. For that, I turn today to Zubaida Bai, CEO of the Grameen Foundation, who believes that gender equality is possible but requires significant systems change to happen. Welcome, Zubaida, to New Thinking for a New World.
Thank you for having me, Alan.
If we were playing a word association game and I said Grameen Bank, the answer I would expect is microfinance, because Professor Yunus all but invented it as a tool to help people escape poverty. But I have the impression that if I were to ask you, same game, one word, 2 words, Grameen Foundation, you'd give me a very different answer. What would it be?
Systems change.
Systems change. Tell me about it.
So Grameen Foundation was established by Dr. Yunus to take his anti-poverty efforts global and the microfinance movement global. We were never the loan providers. We were always enablers of capital and ensuring that the microcredit movement that Dr. Yunus started, which morphed into the microfinance movement, actually did what it was intended to at the last mile. Over the last 25 years, what we've seen is that we've been able to make tremendous impact in that space. And looking at a Grameen Foundation 2.0, what we realized that a loan was just the beginning, and that instead of moving forward from there, we really need to move backwards to ensure that we fix the root cause of the issue that is not allowing women to show up with their full potential, and ensure that they can use this capital to walk out of poverty. And hence, Grameen Foundation is all about transforming systems for women to ensure that they're not financially abused by the system and that they can show up with their full potential by not fixing the woman, by fixing systems around them.
So in a sense, the shift has been from the original focus, which was on poverty, and especially extreme poverty, towards women in poverty and the systems that keep them there. Is that a fair?
I think the focus is still on poverty, but we are double flicking on the gender aspect, because what we are seeing is that women are not fully participating in the system because of the financially abusive system that exists towards them, right? You just spoke about the United Nations and how they are talking about the indicators that women are left behind and we aren't able to meet the gender equality goals. But just as of recently, which is, I believe, September of 2024, we had 190 leaders invited to the UN General Assembly Week to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, and only 19 of them were women, right? So when you have 10% of global leaders representing the fact that we are lagging behind such an important issue, I think we are doing a disservice to what we want to achieve as gender equality by not even having women at the table to voice what women need.
A lot of the conversation around this issue, around gender inequality, focuses on legal systems, changing laws that cover reproductive rights, laws that explicitly discriminate, laws that permit child brides, et cetera, et cetera. But you're looking at financial systems and financial systems that in effect abuse women and are part of this web that keeps women in extreme poverty. Why finance and why not legal?
I believe that gender and power are two things that we focus on, and women having access to economic power is the first step for them to show up and say that we want to show up with our full potential. We want to be economically independent. And that voice is necessary for us to stop child marriage. That voice is necessary for them to stand up for their own rights. That voice is necessary for them to go change legal systems. So for us, women having their own voice and power and ensuring that nothing is standing in their way and showing up with their full potential is a core part of how we believe the legal systems and the child bride issues that you're talking about will be dismantled eventually.
If I read between the lines, essentially what you're saying is money is power.
Money is power, and we all know that. And what we are finding at Grameen Foundation is that when you spoke about kind of the care economy and the burden of care economy on women, right? How does that get dismantled? So we start with what we call the intra-household dialogues, where we are actually ensuring that women eat meals with the family at the table. What happens then? Women have conversations about money, about education. When women have a seat at the table in their own homes, then the members of the family are respecting her as an individual member. And when she does step out as an economic provider, everybody needs to step up and support her with the household chores. That's when she's going to be successful at home and outside, right? So a core part of a woman having a meal at the table in her own household and us allowing that to happen through a systems change perspective is a core part of how she's respected, valued, and supported, not just in her house, but when she does step out of the house. We know that globally about 10.5 billion hours every single day is the unpaid care work that women provide to the global economy. How does that load shift? It's only when all the other members of the family look at her as a significant contributor economically to the family and value her and are stepping up and supporting her in doing that. That's the first step in our systems change process.
Let's work through the other changes, because that obviously puts a woman in the conversation. That's, I would argue, I suspect, is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for what you're trying to accomplish.
That's the first step, where we ensure that a woman has agency and voice in her own house and is respected when she steps out of the house. The second step is what we call systems or community mobilization. And a core part of that is ensuring that we create male champions. What do we mean by that? We mean that a man is usually threatened by a woman's economic independence because he's groomed and grown to believe that he is the sole economic provider. And when that role is shifted, his masculinity is threatened. We ensure that these men have other cohorts of men that he can lean on, and that he looks at women as a way equal economic contributor so that the family can walk out of poverty and his generations can walk out of poverty, and that he will be able to accept the fact that his woman is not going to take a loan and give it to him, but she's going to take a loan and run a business so their family income increases significantly, which not only walks him out of poverty, but his generations out of poverty. So step one, intra-household dialogues. Step two, community mobilization, with the core part being male champions. Step three is where we train a woman professionally. We ensure that, be it climate-smart agriculture practices, be it access to markets, be it entrepreneurship skills, technology training. Through these three steps, we are actually de-risking a woman personally and professionally. We then position this woman as a de-risked candidate to a financial institution. It doesn't necessarily need to be microfinance. And now we expect the financial industry to look at her as a low-risk candidate. And the last step being, if all this does not work, we'd step up and guarantee these loans for the loan to move faster at the lowest interest rate possible and the full amount that the woman is asking for. So our systems transformation begins from home, goes into communities, is about training a woman professionally, is about bringing a financial institution on board and sharing the risk if the need be. And that entire process for us is systems transformation.
In a moment, I want to focus on specific country situations. But before we get there, could you give the audience a sense of how you go about doing, especially the first couple steps, which are dramatically different than I think anybody else is trying to do?
Our entire model for the last 25 years has been dependent and works in tandem with identifying local grassroots institutions, identifying community agents that have respect in the community, and adapting the curriculum for each community with those community agents who then go in and have those household conversations, who then have the conversations with men around kind of masculinity. And then we bring in other trainers for the professional training. So our entire model is based on local grassroots institutions, identifying local community agents who are trained by us, and we adapt the curriculum to the local context with them.
You're trying to change, you need to change both culture and social systems. And you're trying to do it, if I understand, in effect, one family unit at a time, one community at a time. Have you started trying to do this, and does it work?
Each one of the 5 verticals that I have mentioned to you, we've done them as standalone. What we are doing now is to say that all these things need to work in tandem and need to come one after the other. We have started implementing this in West Africa, especially in Ghana. And what we saw over the last 8 to 9 months is that we were able to reduce interest rates for women from 43% down to 12%. So it is working. And we launched our new strategy right at the onset of UN General Assembly Week. And now we are starting to raise resources to scale that work to other communities. And what we see this is that it is a adaptable and transferable model that will scale when we start moving community by community, but that all that can happen in parallel. And really, this strategy is all about not solving a problem, but addressing the root cause of the issue. Because if we don't do that, then we can reach millions of people, but we come back to square one all the time.
What do War Lessons from Gaza, Rethinking Education, Peace in Ukraine, and Visionary Leadership have in common? They are all themes from recent episodes of this podcast. Check out more episodes on tallbergfoundation.org or on a platform of your choice.
I took a look at some of the work that UNCTAD has done on gender inequality, where they try to put numbers on everything, which is one of the bad habits that economists sold to political scientists and sociologists years ago. But let's go with the numbers anyhow. So if you looked at the UNCTAD ratings on gender inequality, you would discover that only Iceland scores 100. I have no idea how you can score 100. And only Chad scores literally 0. So both extremes are there. But what's interesting is that there really is clustering. Not surprisingly, the West tends to do better on the UNCTAD ratings, followed in order by Latin America, Asia and Oceania, and Africa. What struck me looking country at specific countries is that the worst performers are Bangladesh, Iran, Tunisia, Egypt, Chad, Jordan, and I suspect the Taliban's Afghanistan would be there if there were any numbers collected in Afghanistan, but I don't think there are. And what they all have in common is they're heavily Muslim countries. Does religion have anything to do with gender inequality, with poverty, and with the interlinkage between gender inequality and poverty? And if so, what do you do about it?
For me, my personal take, Grameen does not focus on a particular religion or a country, in which form. But if you ask me personally, I believe religion is a patriarchal institution, and that it is a way to keep women under the radar or subjugated in a way. Faith is basically where we are coming in. And in my mind, we can really break through the religious barriers in many ways. And when it comes to economic independence, no matter which religion you're from, you want to look at you and your family being out of poverty. You don't want to suffer. right? And so the angle that we are taking of economic independence and walking out of poverty in a sustainable way, I believe is something that will resonate no matter which religion and where you come from. And we are seeing that happen. Again, like I said, I don't necessarily believe that we look at any of our numbers from a religious angle, but we are working with some in Ghana. We are working with some polygamous marriages, right? Where I don't believe it is religious, but it is cultural. And we are able to break through polygamous marriages through our male champion program, where the man realizes, now, is he going to change in this generation? No, but his generations to come will question the polygamous relationship and will question the role of women. And that's what we are trying to see. So the change that we are trying to bring about is intergenerational. It does not have any religious or geographical boundaries. It does have the core focus of how do you ensure that we dismantle systems for women from an economic independence lens. And that should be, in our mind, that is the most successful way to look at things. Because when in our male champion program, I believe our success is attributed to a man recognizing how giving women economic independence, be it allowing her to take a loan, allowing her to have a bank account, will actually enable his generations to walk out of poverty, right? So that economic lens, I believe, is very efficient, and that's what's working in our favor at this point.
That all makes sense to me, but I'm hearing you with Western ears. I was trained as an economist decades ago, so of course that's the right set of answers. But I don't think the Taliban, and not to pick on the Taliban, there's some reason why the most gender unequal countries are heavily Muslim. So I'm wondering, I understand that your approach is non-religious, which is not to say it's secular, just it's a-religious, maybe is a better word. But countries have to let you in, don't they?
I do, but I don't think I'm the right person to answer the question on what a Taliban rule does or not, because I don't think I even have a remotest understanding of why they do what they do.
I know no one who does, actually, but Bangladesh is a country where Professor Yunus is, in fact, the advisor president or whatever it is, and it's a country that has severe gender inequality. Do you think this program will work there?
So by default, the way Grameen Foundation was created was to work outside of Bangladesh. So Bangladesh is the only country that we don't work in, where Dr. Yunus heavily works from a perspective of both gender equality, economic independence, and financial inclusion. He has that pretty much under his control, and he's been very successful at it, slowly and steadily. I think he has the right role to make that change happen. But anything outside of Bangladesh is our territory, and I can answer questions on those.
That covers a lot of countries with huge issues to address. How are you started in Ghana with this, which is sort of the test case, I take it. You said it's going well. It started well. How do you see it expanding? Are you going to focus on West Africa? Are you going to try other places? Are people coming to you? Is the word starting to get around that there is something different going on here?
For sure. For sure. We are expanding in West Africa. So our next stop is going to be Nigeria, where our male champion program is launching, and we'll build on that from a financial inclusion perspective. Like I said, most of these programs individually are happening already in India. We're doing a very amazing program in Uganda with the refugee settings, where we've been working on systems change for a while. And so West Africa will definitely be where we will start, but our focus is to ensure that we will work with any country where we have strong local partners, where we can enable this model to be replicable and scalable within the country, and then move from there. So West Africa definitely is where we've started launching the full strategy in itself.
You mentioned just now refugees, and just listening to your description of the program, about the approach, strikes me that a hotbed of possibility would indeed be the refugees camps, especially the camps in Jordan, the camps in other countries of the world, where you have this mass concentration of extreme poverty and hopelessness, and you have potential solution here. Are you working closely with the organizations that are working in these camps?
I'll give you an example of what we've done in Uganda. We are one of the core consortium partners working in refugee camps in Uganda. And we've been able to train women. We've been able to identify community agents. We've been able to use technology to ensure that these women saving groups go digital and that these entrepreneurs have the right kind of training. But we did not have access to capital in these camps. So we were able to work with a financial institution, subsidize the cost of the financial institution to come set up a quasi branch in Uganda, and enable them to create a sustainability model. And today, the financial institution has established a permanent branch in Uganda as Grameen is stepping out to ensure that these refugees get access to capital as well. So when we talk about systems change, we're really talking about ensuring that every single aspect from households to that financial piece is fixed. And this is one of the examples of how we've done it in a refugee camp.
You are a strategist. What are the keys to success that you're focused on? What do you need to make this work at the level you think it can work at?
I think, one, we really are trying to advocate for the need for gender equality. I believe as much as people talk about it and as much as people talk about systems change, there are very few organizations out there that can tell you exactly step by step how that systems change can happen. So over the last year, we've spent a lot of time advocating to organizations, getting them on board, and ensuring that the strategy will resonate with as many stakeholders as possible. And we've seen success in that. Now the strategy is officially launched. We are looking at collaborators, at partners for scale, at local grassroots institutions, and at financial resources to help us take this and get running with it, right? Like it's a core part of how we move forward. So we need the right partners, we need the right stakeholders, and we need the right resources to help take the strategy off the ground.
Can you dimension that?
What do you mean by it?
Can you dimension the kinds of resources that are needed, the kinds of commitment that are needed? Is this something that requires the United Nations engagement? Does it require national engagement? Does it require private sector engagement?
I think it requires aspects of all of the above. United Nations will play a core role in being an advocate for us and ensuring that this aligns with the Sustainable Development Goals. I think that's the angle they will bring in. Private sector foundations and corporates are allowing us to ensure that we can bring transparency to kind of the supply chain when we use entrepreneurs through the process and smallholder farmers through the process. And we are looking at larger family foundations and private foundations to step up and bring the capital that will be matched by the private sector most often than not. So the dimensions are that, yes, we will need UN-like organizations to buy into the systems change concept and the alignment with sustainable development goals. We will be working with the private sector in terms of how do they reach the last mile, and we will be working with private and larger foundations for resources to fund this work.
As we finish this conversation, I do want to go back to the Sustainable Development Goals. They are obviously, and were understood at the time, to be aspirational, part of the desire to put specific numbers on a variety of things, gender inequality being one of them, probably with the knowledge that those goals couldn't be met within the time frame, the 15-year time frame that was agreed to. But in almost all of those SDGs, we're nowhere near on track on almost anything. Gender inequality being one of the ones where, by their measure, almost 60 to 65% of the elements that were supposed to be accomplished aren't being accomplished. As you think and live in the you're trying to solve that problem. That's what this is all about. It is aspirational. Do you believe it's possible?
I'm 100% sure we're not going to meet the SDG goals, right? Especially with gender equality. I think the estimates from the World Economic Forum are that we're going to take 132 years, I believe, to achieve gender parity. And especially when it comes to gender parity and financial inclusion, I believe that's 268 years, right? And again, where we are coming in from, and we are confident, is that when you start looking at not the problem to be solved, but the root cause of the issue that is not allowing you to move forward and address the problem, that will take a longer time to get off the ground, but given Grameen's experience, we are ready to hit the ground running. And once that happens, we believe that we will be able to fast track gender equality goals as long as we're not moving resources away from gender equality. A lot of the resources that were assigned to gender equality today are moving towards climate, today are moving towards pandemic, today are moving towards a lot more issues that need to be solved in terms of migration, in terms of global crises. So how do we ensure that with the limited resources that we have, that when we do go in and provide a solution, that solution is there to last and we are no longer needed after that intervention happens? I think that's where Grameen's role is. So as much as gender equality is moving backwards and not forwards in achieving sustainable development goals, we believe that there is light at the end of the day and we can make it happen.
The world needs hope. I'm not a great believer in optimist or pessimist. I am a great believer in hope and despair. And clearly, you're operating on that hope vector. And in that spirit, I hope that you continue to move this in the right direction. We're obviously going to miss all of the sustainable development goals, just like we missed all of the climate goals. And it's partly a resource problem. It's partly a power problem. It's partly a political problem. But I think uniquely, and I mean this as a sincere compliment, you've stepped back and said, okay, the reason we're missing is because we're not focusing on the root causes. Same conversation occurs in migration, but not often enough. Same conversation occurs in climate, but not often enough. So I hope that these initiatives that you're promoting, designing, imagining, promoting, encouraging, funding, all those words are successful, because I think it could spill over into other spaces.
100%. The need for systems change has been there for a really long time. I remember about 20 years ago as a engineering postgraduate student learning about supply chain and systems change in healthcare, right? And that was 20 years ago. And today we're still talking about systems change in healthcare. We're still talking about systems change in a very theoretical manner. And I believe that Grameen is here to change that. We've always done systems change, but we've never spoken about it in the way that we do today. And really, we believe that we can influence the sector in a way to look at gender not as a problem to solve, but as a must-have. And we cannot, and again, this is not about having hope or being optimist. It's about being a realist. You can't do what you want to do in the world without putting women at the center of everything. Women don't need to be behind. Women don't need to be at the back. They need to be beside every man who is there to succeed in the world, and she needs to succeed with him. And we believe our framework and our systems change approach can make that happen.
I think we should leave it there, because that is an absolute terrific bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of New Thinking for a New World. I'm Alan Stoga, podcast host, and I look forward to your joining our next conversation. Remember, tell us what you think at tallbergfoundation.org.